Okay, thank you, Alex. This is pretty scary because I'm not sure if people can hear me. I hope you can. We'll make a start. As I said before, we are the tench fishers, and this is really just looking. Tench fishing the future is what are the possibilities for moving forward in a currently quite often carp dominated world. So if we can go to the next slide, Alex, please. At least I know you can hear me. So just briefly, and I promise to everybody this will not be death by PowerPoint, because I can think of nothing worse. So and I certainly won't be reading every bullet point out, but just to pick some of the highlights, just to give you an idea of tench fishers. So we go back a long way, almost to when I was born, which is a really long time ago. We've got a good solid membership, as you can see there, in the high 400s now. We're pretty well organised. We have events, and we've taken catch records for just about as long as the tench fishers have been around, and that has proved very useful. I'm very keen on the supporters of the Angling Trust. We support the trust as a group who we're registered with, and probably half to 2/3 of our membership are also individuals as well. Can't say exactly, but we certainly see that as a very, very strong relationship, and this is just proof of it. Phil's touched on the book already, and we have a very we've put effective online presence. We communicate a lot as a group in a very organised and polite way, so the membership is engaged rather than just joining for the hell of it. So next slide, please. We touched on the NTHA, and we've called it the National Tench Heritage Alliance, and there's two key words in there that I like to do. First of all is the heritage bit. Tench have always been part of the fishing culture in this country. The tench is probably recognised, and I've seen a number of surveys where they say, you know, it is the most popular fish. Everybody likes catching a tench, and a lot of us have a passion for it. It's the heritage part. The alliance part is we cannot get anything done without moving forward without forging these alliances, working with partners, working with other agencies, and the Angling Trust is one, and we'll come on to a diagram I've got later, which is really saying you need to be working with people rather than alone on this. And so that's why we got into the name for it. We started off what turns out to be now about 8 years ago, very embryonic then. I am very keen on the second point, which is putting something back. We are a group who not just, yes, we like catching big tench and talking about them and taking pictures and methods and tactics, but this is broader than that. And the membership are fully behind this, the NTHA. So the objectives, and I think this is really important, this is why we're here today. So the education and the knowledge part of tench and tench fishing, and it's about the fish more so than the fishing, really. So raising the profile, we really ought to be protecting the tench fishing and fisheries that exist now, but also, and here's what I'm here for, any people with club members or fishery managers, just to encourage the promotion of tench rather than just chucking a few fish in and saying, well, we've got some tench in there. Okay, we work with people. This is part of the alliance, and ultimately the lobbying and the encouraging part is how do we get this to happen. And we'll talk about the Environment Agency later, who will be key in all this, but also with other partners and people who will help us and you, if indeed you want to embrace this, with that. Can we go on to the next slide, Alex, please? So this is the diagram I talked about. You'll see on now, I'm not going to go through every particular part of it, but you'll see at the top the Environment Agency, the Fisheries, and the Calverton, which is where they breed their fish, the Angling Trust, and favourite part of mine right down the bottom is fish refuge suppliers. I'll show you a picture near the end, an image near the end of this, which is about fish refuges and how you really need to be protecting what you've got before you start putting more and more fish into places. So we've got to, that's just an idea of the sort of alliances that you will need, as well as the NTHA does, of course, to make this happen. And we're in a position to advise and help people on that. Next slide, please. This is for Phil. Unmute.
Can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, I can hear you now. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Sometimes I wonder if tench fishing's really got a future. They are a particular species, they have a particular niche, and they have suffered in my lifetime, certainly to the extent where when I started fishing in the 60s, the majority of waters had tench in. Now it's very much a minority. So there's been a change, taste change, fashions change. So we've seen a decline in the number of waters that have tench. We haven't seen a decline in the size of the tench. At their best, they're as big as they've ever been. That's a different story. But what I will say is it's pretty well impossible to create a specimen tench fishery in the way that you might create a specimen carp fishery. It's pretty well impossible. You can create tench fisheries, but growing fish into double figures is something that is, something that nature does in certain situations. The main issue, I think, really is one of recruitment in many instances. And that's item 4 there, which I want to draw attention to. And the problem with tench is, of course, they spawn relatively late. So they have a fairly short period for the tiny little fry, which are about 4 millimeters long, to develop into fish that are going to survive through the winter. So if it's a particularly cold late summer, they will have issues. If it's a particularly cold early summer, then they will spawn late, and all these things affect the recruitment. And so good spawning years for tench are a minority. They may only happen once every 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years. So it means that very often populations are on a bit of a knife edge. So the issue of recruitment, I think, is very important. The other issue that affects tench in particular, I think, is the issue about fish breeding. Now, it's much easier to produce fast-growing carp. King carp are selectively bred to grow very fast, and tench grow, the slide says slow growers. I would say they grow relatively slowly, which means that they're relatively expensive if you want to bring them through to a reasonable stockable size. And quite often that means that really, if you're an angling club with carp, you're going to get a lot more bang for your buck, and that is evidently true. It is more expensive to stock with sizable tench when you can get them, given the fact that they are larger tench are relatively hard to get hold of. It mentions there overstocking of competing species. Tench are not great competitors. Ideally, what they like to do is to more or less dominate a water. So if you want really good tench fishing, then they probably got to be the primary species in the water. But they will do very well in balanced fisheries as long as there is a balance, just that, between the species and not an overriding number of one or other competing species. And they will go back and they will disappear if there is overstocking of competing fish. And the whole point about tench is, and the really important thing is, you've got to make room for them. You've got to ensure in a given water that you have a situation where the tench have a niche that they can exploit. Then if they can do that, they will be fine. And in theory, at least, they will self-propagate and you will have tench forevermore as long as the balance is maintained. So those are the main issues anyway that affect tench. Go to the next slide, please. So what are we about? Well, basically what we want to do is, I think first and foremost, is to make sure that people who have good tench fishing look after it. That, I think, is a really important consideration. It is much easier, as I've said, to undermine a tench population than it is to create one. So that if you have a decent tench fishery, for goodness sake, be careful what you're doing in terms of stocking. And generally speaking, if you want a bit of this and a bit of that and a few of these, and you don't have a plan and you're not careful, then the tench very often are the species that will suffer. Obviously, I'm a tench nut, and I believe that tench fishing has its own ethos, its own character, its own place in the fishing world, and I'll do everything I can to promote that. And I don't think, you know, that many all-round anglers would argue with that. So we're interested in protection of tench. We're interested in how you might develop new tench fisheries, bearing in mind always that you've got to make room for them. And we hope that people will stop and think a little bit more about tench. That if you've got a club with a number of waters, let's say that particular one is going to be our tench water. And one of the things I would say is, if you want big tench, you need a big water, 5 acres minimum, and ideally, well, as big as it gets. But the top tench waters, they're often, you know, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 100 acres. And that tends to be best for really big tench. So that's also worth bearing in mind. Sometimes you get collections of waters and they put the tench in the little pond, which works up to a point, but only up to a point. That's, again, something that needs to be considered. So we hope to nurture better attitudes, and always remember that most people like tench, and they do appeal to weekend and average anglers, and they're as important as anybody else. So I'll hand back to Ian. Thank you.
Give me the next slide, Alex, please. Thanks, Phil. Just to give us it gave us a flavour. So this is how can we do it? That, you know, and there is no one size fits all. There is no magic answer, but there are some things you can do. And if you know, I'm a great believer in, if you want something badly enough, you can make it happen. We have done, the Tench Fishers have done a lot of work at Sywell Reservoir. Some of you may know it's in the Northamptonshire in the Midlands. The tench population used to be, it's an iconic water for big tench, went downhill around about the turn of the century, and we've done a lot of work there and learned a lot of lessons, I might add, by talking to people who know far more than we do, about helping to try and put it back on its, or to some way towards where it used to be before. And that was all sort of good learning, and we spent quite a bit of money as well. We're working with the Angling Trust, and also very important with other big bodies as well. We are starting to generate our knowledge base, and I'm going to say I've put social media ... Social media has its place in the world, and if managed properly, it's a fantastic resource, and we're benefiting today from that. And it's a good way of sharing knowledge, and also in terms of whether it's documentation or this type. So yeah, we very much embrace that as well. What I have agreed, well, Phil and I, if a club or association is serious about wanting to create or look after an existing tench fishery, or perhaps improve what they've got, we will be willing to come out and, wherever possible, meet with you and talk to you and share what we can to help you on your journey. So opportunities are there. And the last bit is, and this is working with now the Angling Trust, we've got some web space we're just in the process of populating, which is all about let's call it a resource, a document library, and there'll be information in there that you can see with the various points about where we can give advice and who to talk to. We're not the experts, but we can certainly become a centre of knowledge, and we can point you the direction of people who know that, and also the lessons we've learned. So that's where how we try to hope. We're not going to sit here and say you should go and do this. We're willing to actually roll our sleeves up in an administrative sense and help you. Thanks, Alex. The next one. So there's just 3 more images to come, and then we've finished with the PowerPoint, please. This is absolutely crucial. Now, this is at Sywell Reservoir. You might notice the valve tower in the back. It doesn't matter where it is. We spoke to aquaculture experts and fishery managers, and the first thing, the Environment Agency, the first thing they told us was, you've got to protect what you've got. You've got to protect what nature is providing in terms of small fish. You've got to, from predation. These are fish refuges. You can see there. They're very simple to construct, and if you can put those into your water, you're going a long way towards looking after your investment, and it is money, and we're putting money into a big watery hole in the ground. We've had surveys, underwater surveys, scanning surveys done on these, and the fish are all round these. They're very, especially if you've got a cormorant issue, and I'm sure it helps with otteras as well. But protect your fish first. Very, very important. We can advise you on how to build these. We've got some documentation. Next one, please, Alex. This is just an example. This is from a fishery. We've put some tench, with a lot of tench, back into Sywell, different year classes, different breeders, and this is just some of the little bars of gold that have gone in there. It's a nice picture. We all like a tench. And the final one, please. Make friends with your local fishery officers from the Environment Agency. They are absolutely essential into helping you getting stuff done. They've got knowledge. They've got, and if you put in the right type of case, they can even supply small tench for you. That's a guy called Jake Reeds, and that's at Sywell again, and they've come along and they're actually putting some small tench into Sywell. And this is one of the alliances I talked about before, and these really are the good guys. So that's all from me. Thank you very much, Alex, and I think we're going to take some questions.